Sound of rushing water, then a sharp, desperate gasp, quickly followed by the shriek of a poorly maintained gate hinge. A perfect backyard oasis, the only peace I had left. Until she turned it into her personal nightmare, I warned her. I begged her to stop. But when a midnight swim ends in screams and third-degree burns, who pays the price? It wasn't the trespass that broke the law. It was the lawsuit that broke me. The fiberglass shimmered under the halogen deck lights, a deep, inviting sapphire blue. For Ethan Vance, the pool wasn't a luxury. It was a $60,000 down payment on his sanity. Freshly divorced, he'd poured the last of his settlement into this house, a modest 3-bedroom with an oversized backyard and this crystalline, geometric centerpiece. It was his fortress, his therapy, the only quiet space left in a world that had felt relentlessly loud for the last 2 years. That quiet ended the night Brenda Jensen, his neighbor from 2 doors down, first mistook his private sanctuary for a public amenity. Brenda wasn't just a neighbor. She was the neighbor. The kind who had an opinion on your lawn gnome placement and whose every request came delivered with the tone of an official mandate. Ethan had met her twice, once when she demanded he trim a non-existent branch overhanging her property, and again when she critiqued the frequency of his recycling collection. The first trespass was subtle. Ethan woke one Saturday morning to find his inflatable flamingo bobbing cheerfully on the wrong side of the deep end, slicked with unfamiliar sunscreen. He dismissed it. Kids, maybe. The second time, 3 days later, was undeniable. He was sitting on the patio, working on his laptop at 11 p.m., when he heard the light, practiced plop of a body hitting water. He stood up, his heart thumping not with fear, but with a searing, territorial indignation. Brenda was doing the backstroke, a cheap, plastic wine glass balanced precariously on the edge of the coping, illuminated by the underwater lights. She wore a pristine white one-piece swimsuit and a satisfied smirk. Ethan walked to the edge, his voice tight. "Brenda, what in God's name are you doing?" She stopped mid-stroke, water clinging to her perfectly sculpted blonde hair. "Oh, Ethan, don't look so stressed. I just needed a quick dip. My AC unit is acting up, and yours is simply inviting. Don't worry, I brought my own glass." She lifted the glass slightly, a casual gesture that infuriated him. "This is private property," Ethan said, his voice rising, breaking his rule about never engaging. "You climbed over the back fence. That's trespassing." Brenda pushed off the wall and floated lazily. "That old chain link? It's practically falling apart. Honestly, you should replace it. Think of the liability. Anyway, I'm your neighbor. Neighbors share. It's what community is about, darling." "No, Brenda. Neighbors respect property lines. Get out, now." She sighed, a dramatic flutter of the eyelashes. "Fine, fine. Don't be such a tyrant." She hauled herself out, dripping chlorinated water onto his expensive teak decking. She retrieved her wine, gave him a condescending nod, and then, with breathtaking audacity, used his expensive custom-embroidered towel, which was laid neatly on a lounge chair, to dry her face before tossing it onto the wet cement. "Thanks, Ethan. See you around." Ethan stood there, shivering despite the summer heat, watching her disappear back over the dilapidated fence. He felt not victorious, but violated. The confrontation changed nothing, except perhaps making Brenda's trespasses bolder. For 2 weeks, it became a game of cat and mouse that Ethan, the homeowner, was losing. He installed 8-foot redwood privacy fencing. She came over it with a ladder, once leaving the ladder leaning casually against his side, like a dare. He installed motion sensor floodlights. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and moved with the deliberate slowness of a mime, managing to bypass the sensors. The local police became weary of his calls. "Mr. Vance, we've spoken to Ms. Jensen. She insists she's just retrieving a stray cat. It's a civil matter unless we catch her in the act or she causes damage." Ethan's sanctuary was ruined. He couldn't relax. Every splash, every shadow sent him sprinting to the window, phone in hand. The stress of the pool had eclipsed the stress of the divorce. Then the true disaster struck. A major storm ripped through the county, dropping 3 inches of rain in an hour and blowing half the canopy of an old oak into his pool. Worse, The heavy rain overwhelmed the ancient sewer system, causing a small but deeply unpleasant backup near the pool equipment pad. The pool water was visibly murky, filled with organic material, and the smell was potent. It took Ethan all of Saturday to net out the debris. On Sunday morning, he knew the pool needed a nuclear option, a shock so potent it would kill everything living and non-living in the water and on the surfaces. He called his pool supply company and purchased a 5-gallon drum of 99% trichloro-S-triazinatrione, granular chlorine, highly stabilized, and 2 gallons of muriatic acid, the strongest available solution for pH balancing after a massive shock. He methodically measured out the chemicals, adding 3 times the necessary amount of chlorine and following up with the acid to prevent scaling from the extreme chlorination. The chemical scent that wafted up was so sharp it stung his nostrils from 10 feet away. Before noon, he put up the signs. They were huge, 24-inch fluorescent yellow posters, duct-taped to the fence, the patio door, and the pool gate latch. They screamed in bold, black 72-point type, "Danger! Extreme chemical shock! Acid wash in progress, do not enter! Chemical levels are lethal, remains toxic for 48 hours. Call 911 if exposure occurs." He even used red spray paint on the pool cover box, adding a crude skull and crossbones. He knew Brenda was a visual learner, but only when the visual was a critique of his property. This time, he made it impossible to miss. He also reviewed his security footage, ensuring the cameras captured both the chemical application and the clear placement of the signs. He spent the rest of Sunday inside. The chemical smelled faint even through closed doors, but the tension was thick. He kept checking his phone, half expecting a passive-aggressive text from Brenda about the color of the warning signs clashing with his paint scheme. Nothing. Monday night, 12:47 a.m. Ethan was finally deeply asleep. The alarm shrieked. It was the fence alarm, not the motion sensor. She's here. She found a way to disable the sensor. Ethan shot out of bed, grabbing his phone. He was halfway to the window when the second sound hit him. It was not a splash. It was the sound of a large animal slamming into something solid, followed immediately by a noise Ethan would never forget. A high-pitched, desperate, agonizing scream that was abruptly cut off by a choke. Then a series of frantic, ragged gasps. This was different. This was visceral. Ethan burst through the patio door, the night air thick with the suffocating, metallic sweet smell of hyperchlorinated water and vaporized acid. The powerful floodlights, triggered by the fence alarm, bathed the scene in harsh white. Brenda was scrambling out of the shallow end, but not using the steps. She was clawing at the fiberglass edge, her movements desperate and uncoordinated, like a crab boiling alive. Her white swimsuit was now a sickly yellow-green, and where the water had touched her exposed skin, her arms, her legs, her chest, the skin was turning a furious, horrifying red, already showing the signs of blistering and sloughing. Steam was rising off her shoulders in the cool night air. "My eyes! Oh God, my eyes!" she shrieked, blindly hitting the coping, slipping back down the slick, chemically charged side. "It burns! Ethan, what did you do?" Ethan froze, the reality of the toxic water hitting him like a physical blow. He had warned her. The signs were everywhere. But the sight of her genuine, extreme pain overrode his months of bitter resentment. "Don't move! I'm calling 911!" Ethan yelled, already dialing, his hand trembling so violently he almost dropped the phone. Brenda finally managed to drag herself onto the deck, collapsing onto the rough concrete, clutching her face. She was weeping, not in frustration or entitlement, but in genuine, unbearable agony. "You tried to kill me. You poisoned the water," she choked out, her voice raw. "I had 3 warning signs up. I shocked the pool for contamination. I told everyone it was toxic." Ethan shouted into the phone, talking to the dispatcher and Brenda simultaneously. He dropped the phone onto the ground and grabbed a neutral hose from the side of the house, spraying the weakest mist he could manage onto her burning skin. She screamed again, the shock of the cool water only amplifying the chemical reaction. The paramedics arrived quickly, followed by the fire department, who had to handle the chemical exposure. The fire marshal taped off the pool area like a crime scene. Ethan stood in his bathrobe, watching his personal sanctuary become a spectacle of misery and bureaucratic procedure. He gave his statement, showing the police the security footage, the clear posting of the warning signs, the application of the highly concentrated chemicals, and finally, the shot of Brenda in her wide-brimmed hat, casually tearing down 2 of the warning signs before using her small aluminum ladder to hop the fence and enter the pool. The police were subdued, but clear. "Mr. Vance, you took reasonable precautions. The signs were visible. She removed them and trespassed. It's reckless endangerment on her part, frankly." Ethan felt a surge of relief, a fleeting, cold wash of karma. Brenda was hospitalized with chemical burns, primarily on her legs, torso, and face, including damage to her cornea. Ethan spent the next day draining the pool. The court papers felt heavy, cold, and impossibly real against the warmth of Ethan's trembling hand. They weren't just a legal threat. They were a declaration of war, aimed directly at the last vestiges of his stability. He crumpled the empty cereal bowl he'd been holding. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Malicious chemical trap. Brenda Jensen's lawyer, a firm called Keating and Stern, had framed the entire incident not as a reckless accident by a trespasser, but as a calculated act of violence by a bitter homeowner. The first person Ethan called was his ex-wife, Sarah. He didn't want comfort. He wanted the cool, detached legal analysis she'd been trained to deliver as a paralegal, even if she often used that analysis against him. "It's Ethan," he clipped, pacing the perimeter of the empty, chlorine-bleached pool. Brenda Jensen, she's suing me for assault. She fell in the pool after I super-shocked it, and now they're claiming I did it on purpose because I knew she was coming." There was a long, dry silence on the line. "The neighbor you told me about? The one climbing your fence?" Sarah finally asked. Her tone was clinical, already distant. "Yes. I put up huge signs, Sarah. I have video of her taking them down." The police said I was in the clear, but her lawyer is twisting it. "They put a figure on the punitive damages, Sarah. It's $1.2 million. I'll lose the house." Wait. Slow down, Ethan," she said, sounding annoyed, not sympathetic. "If you applied a toxic level of chemicals, and you knew she was routinely entering your property, a good lawyer could argue attractive nuisance, but the intentional part, that's a stretch. Do you have documentation from the pool supply company? Did you use commercial-grade chemicals?" "I used 3 times the recommended shock and 2 gallons of muriatic acid to clean up after the storm. I was following procedure for extreme contamination. It was toxic." Sarah sighed, the sound grating down the phone line. "That's exactly what they want, Ethan. If you use 3 times the normal amount, they argue it wasn't maintenance. It was premeditated battery. Trespassing is a misdemeanor. Chemical assault is a felony charge with civil penalties. Get a lawyer, immediately, a good one. And for God's sake, stop talking to me about the details. I am not your lawyer, and I'm definitely not your emotional support." She hung up, leaving Ethan standing alone in the desolate yard, the receiver buzzing with the echo of his failure. The unconventional defense Ethan spent the next 48 hours in a fog of panic, calling every respectable defense attorney his insurance company recommended. They all offered the same grim assessment. Great case for his homeowner's insurance carrier to handle, but the claim of intent made it messy. The video of Brenda removing the signs was good for the trespassing defense, but the 99% trichloro-S-triazonatrione dosage gave the prosecution a plausible narrative. He was so angry at the trespasser that he booby-trapped his pool. He was on his last contact, a referral from a pool maintenance technician who'd once had a bizarre property dispute. When he found Alex Lex, Reyes wasn't in a mahogany-paneled office. She worked out of a cramped, overstuffed suite on the 2nd floor of a building next to a bail bondsman. When Ethan walked in, he found a woman in her late 30s, dressed in a sharp, almost military-cut black suit, sitting behind a desk piled high with paper. She had a face that looked permanently tired, but eyes that were startlingly clear and intense, like polished glass. "Mr. Vance," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, gesturing to a plastic chair. "I heard the synopsis. Trespasser gets burned, sues the homeowner for attempted chemical murder. It's ridiculous, but the jury pool loves a good tragedy. And a burned woman is always a tragedy. Ethan leaned forward. I didn't try to kill her. I tried to clean my pool. I followed procedures for a severe contamination event. Did you notify her explicitly in writing that you were shocking the pool with lethal levels of chemicals and that she absolutely could not enter the premises? Lex asked, not looking up as she reviewed the complaint. I put up 3 24-inch fluorescent signs. Ms. Reyes, I have video of her tearing them down. Lex finally looked up, a small grim smile touching her lips. That's why I took the meeting. That video turns this from a defense to an offensive position. But let me be clear, Ethan. We are not defending a civil negligence suit here. We are defending a case that is designed to bankrupt you by claiming you acted with malice. She pointed to the section demanding punitive damages. This is a fishing expedition for your equity. Your divorce settlement bought this house, correct? Her lawyer knows that. They are going for the jugular. What do we do? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. Lex pulled out a legal pad and scribbled 4 words. We established the pattern. The pattern of what? The pattern of her conduct, not just the trespassing. Her lawyer, Mr. Stern, is brilliant at this. He's going to paint you as a bitter, emotionally unstable man, fresh out of a divorce, obsessed with his pool, who snapped. He'll argue the concentration of trichloroestriazonatrione was far beyond what even the most contaminated pool would require, making your maintenance defense questionable. We need to prove that Brenda Jensen has a history of preying on vulnerable situations. But she's just a demanding neighbor, Ethan protested. Lex snorted, leaning back in her chair. Nobody with genuine third-degree chemical burns hires Keating and Stern for fun, Ethan. They are predators. I guarantee you this woman didn't just stumble upon your yard. She was scouting. She was looking for a way to monetize your stress. The injunction and the iron cage Lex filed their initial response, a standard denial of all claims, asserting full compliance with safety protocols and citing the security footage as proof of Brenda's willful, reckless, and criminal trespass. The piece lasted exactly 72 hours. On Friday morning, Lex called Ethan, her voice tight with professional anger. Keating and Stern just filed a motion for a prejudgment attachment, followed by an emergency injunction against the sale or encumbrance of property. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. In layman's terms, Lex, what does that mean? It means that based on the severity of the alleged injuries and the intentional nature of the assault claim, they convinced a judge, a very sympathetic judge, I might add, that you are a flight risk. They are afraid you'll sell the house and flee with the assets before the trial concludes. The injunction puts a temporary lien on your house. You cannot refinance, you cannot sell, and you certainly can't tap into your equity to pay me. So I'm trapped, Ethan whispered, staring out the window at the condemned pool. I can't even pay my legal fees without dipping into my 401k. That's the point, Ethan. They want you stressed, broke, and desperate enough to settle for whatever they demand. They are leveraging your house as collateral for their outrageous claim. This is a common, morally dubious tactic for high-stakes tort cases. Lex paused, then spoke in a lower, more focused tone. Now, we fight this motion, but it won't be easy. But I did what I said I was going to do. I pulled everything on Brenda Jensen and, more importantly, her husband, Mark. Guess what I found? Ethan braced himself, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Brenda's primary claim, the one they are hanging the whole case on, is the intentional nature of the poisoning, which stems from your highly concentrated chemical purchase, Lex continued. We know you bought the industrial-grade shock and acid from a supplier called Apex Pool Chemicals last Sunday. The records are ironclad. The delivery truck driver will testify to the sheer quantity and the warning signs on the barrels. Good, Ethan said weakly. No, not good. It's a smokescreen. I ran a deep dive on every financial and property record tied to Brenda and Mark Jensen for the last 10 years. They are underwater on their mortgage. They filed for bankruptcy protection 3 years ago, and they are deep in debt. They are desperate for a major payout. That's the motive. Lex paused, letting the silence build, making the next reveal cinematic. But here is the irony, Ethan. The twist that changes the game. I found a receipt. A purchase order filed under Mark Jensen's business account. It's for an industrial-grade, full-spectrum outdoor motion sensor alarm system. So, he upgraded his security, Ethan said, confused. No. He didn't install it at his house, Lex said, her voice dropping to a near hiss of triumph. The purchase date is 8 months ago. The shipping address on the PO is for a defunct warehouse, but the installation address, the address where the security company sent the installer, was for your house. Ethan's mind raced. He had an alarm. The fence alarm that shrieked when Brenda entered the pool. The alarm that Brenda somehow bypassed the motion sensors on. The installation company, Perimeter Pro Tech, confirmed it. Mark Jensen purchased the system, which included infrared motion detectors and a custom gate tripwire, and had it installed covertly on your property while you were away 8 months ago. The paperwork is filed under Anonymous Neighbor Donation to HOA Safety Initiative. It was installed and calibrated to alert him every time the gate or fence was breached. He was tracking your property access long before he ever met you. Ethan stared at the phone. The air was gone from the room. It wasn't just a casual trespasser. It wasn't a demanding neighbor. It was a planned, sophisticated operation. They didn't just trespass, Ethan, Lex finished, the sound of her pen scratching across the paper a final, devastating punctuation mark. They were setting... Ethan stared at the purchase order for his own security system, a tangible piece of paper confirming his life had been invaded not by accident, but by a methodical, months-long surveillance scheme. The panic that had driven him for days was replaced by a cold, surgical clarity, the kind of focus that comes when a man realizes he's not just unlucky, but targeted. Lex Reyes, however, was thriving. She was leaning back in her chair, a stack of Brenda Jensen's medical records next to a pile of Mark Jensen's business filings. She looked less tired and more like a scientist who had just confirmed a crucial hypothesis. This purchase order, dated 8 months ago, is gold, Lex explained, tapping the paper. It proves premeditation on their side. Mr. Stern, their lawyer, is painting you as the aggressor who set a trap. We're going to prove they set the trap and chose the precise moment to fall into it. Why wait 8 months? Ethan asked, his voice rough. If they were desperate for money, why not use the pool earlier? Lex held up a printout of a property deed covered in red annotations. That's what my investigator Saul found. It's not just a general debt problem, Ethan. It's specific. Mark Jensen, he's not just a failed businessman. He was a silent partner in a sketchy commercial real estate venture. They leveraged their house and nearly every available asset into a $980,000 high-interest bridge loan tied to developing a strip mall on wetlands, which predictably failed permit review 6 months ago. The debt wasn't just crushing. It had a hard repayment deadline. She pointed to a line of text Saul had circled. The entire loan, principal, interest, and penalties, is due in full on September 28th. Ethan checked the date on his phone. It was September 22nd. 6 days from now. Exactly, Lex said, her eyes glittering with the thrill of the chase. Brenda fell into your pool on September 19th, 3 days before I even met you. They were running out of time. They waited 8 months for the perfect opportunity, which, ironically, was your desperate need to chemically cleanse your pool after the storm. They needed a payout fast, and a civil tort case alleging malicious assault is designed to force a massive, swift settlement before the expense of discovery and trial drags it out. The injunction on your house isn't just leverage. It's a necessary move to guarantee they can seize the asset before their own deadline hits. This wasn't just greed, it was survival, desperate and dangerous. Lex slammed her hand down on the desk. We're not waiting. We are going straight for an emergency motion to lift the attachment and sanction Keating and Stern for abuse of process. We'll use the security system receipt, the financial desperation, and the timing to establish an overt criminal conspiracy to defraud. They tried to use the court as a weapon. Now we turn it back on them. The emergency hearing. The emergency hearing on the motion to lift the prejudgment attachment was set for the following Tuesday. The courtroom was small, stuffy, and silent with anticipation. Mr. Stern, Brenda's attorney, was a tall, silver-haired man who exuded an air of inherited privilege and calm confidence. He wore a quiet sneer that implied Ethan Vance was an irritating inconvenience he would quickly dispatch. Brenda Jensen, wearing thick bandages and a cervical collar that seemed dramatically oversized for her injuries, sat slumped next to him, eliciting sympathy from the judge. A formidable woman named Judge Thompson. Mr. Stern opened first, his voice rich and sorrowful. Your Honor, we are here today because the defendant, Mr. Vance, an angry and emotionally compromised man recently divorced, attempted to leverage his property in a malicious and dangerous manner. He set a chemical trap. My client, Ms. Jensen, a respected community member, is now permanently disfigured, suffering third-degree burns and corneal damage. Mr. Vance's hasty motion is nothing more than a desperate attempt to liquidate his assets before justice is served. He then dismissed Lex's evidence. As for the alleged security system, Your Honor, it's a flimsy straw man. A neighbor seeking community safety made an anonymous, documented contribution to a neighborhood watch initiative. The idea that this is evidence of a complex 8-month conspiracy to assault my client is frankly insulting to the intelligence of this court. Lex stood up, her black suit making her appear sharper and more aggressive than Stern's tailored gray. She didn't raise her voice. She let the facts do the heavy lifting. Your Honor, the defense is not asserting mere negligence. We are asserting a scheme to defraud designed to use the civil courts for criminal gain, Lex began, pushing a folder forward. Mr. Stern claims the security system installed on Mr. Vance's property, purchased by Mark Jensen, was a benign community act. We submit the purchase order, which specifically lists an infrared tripwire calibrated for pool access and the corresponding financial records. Mark Jensen's firm, the shell corporation that paid for the system, is currently facing imminent and catastrophic liquidation due to a bridge loan of nearly $1 million due on Friday, 3 days from now. The courtroom drew a collective sharp breath. Stern's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Brenda shifted uncomfortably, pulling the collar closer around her neck. Lex continued. Connecting the dots. This timeline proves motive. Your Honor, they didn't fall into the pool. They chose the most opportune, high-stakes moment to activate their preset trap. They needed a massive, immediate settlement, and the only way to ensure that was to frame Mr. Vance with a claim of intentional harm, which triggered the potential for these massive punitive damages and, crucially, the prejudgment attachment on his home. She paused, locking eyes with Judge Thompson. The defendant took every reasonable step to warn the public, and specifically the known trespasser, of the deadly chemical levels. He posted 3 24-inch signs. We have security footage showing Ms. Jensen, moments before her injury, removing those signs. Your Honor, Ms. Jensen didn't fall into a trap. She systematically dismantled the safety warnings and jumped into what she knew was a pool being chemically stripped of contamination, counting on the resulting burns to justify a $1.2 million payday. This is not injury. It is self-mutilation for profit. Stern finally jumped up, furious. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making outrageous and unsubstantiated claims of criminal conspiracy, sustained on the term self-mutilation, Ms. Reyes, Judge Thompson said, but her expression was stern, fixed entirely on the evidence presented. She studied the documents, the security system purchase order, Mark's impending debt deadline, and the timeline of the injury. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Stern, can you explain to the court why your client's husband paid for a covert security system specifically targeting Mr. Vance's pool access 240 days before this injury occurred? If this was merely a random act of trespass, Stern stammered. Your Honor, it was a misguided attempt to secure the neighborhood after a series of petty thefts. Ms. Jensen's entry into the pool was a desperate act of heat relief, not a calculated move. Judge Thompson cut him off, her voice decisive. The documents presented demonstrate a highly coordinated, long-term interest in the defendant's property access that is utterly inconsistent with a random act of neighborhood sharing. Furthermore, the timing of the injury, days before a multi-million-dollar loan default, establishes powerful motive for fraud. She looked directly at Ethan and Lex. The court finds that the plaintiff has failed to demonstrate adequate justification for the prejudgment attachment. The defendant has presented sufficient prima facie evidence to suggest the claim of intentional harm is substantially questionable and likely a component of an overarching scheme to defraud. The emergency injunction against the sale or encumbrance of property is hereby lifted. A triumphant grin flashed across Lex's face. Ethan slumped back in his seat, the paralyzing dread that had gripped him since the papers were served finally easing. He could sell the house if he needed to. He was free to fight. The hearing was over. As the small crowd filed out, Ethan and Lex gathered their papers, basking in the small but significant victory. Ethan felt a moment of pure, unadulterated karmic relief, but as he passed through the double doors into the hallway, he caught Mark Jensen, Brenda's husband, standing by the water fountain. Mark wasn't looking at his wife or his lawyer. He was staring straight at Ethan. Mark was a large, heavy-set man, normally placid and unremarkable, but the placidity was gone. His face was a sheet of ashen gray, and his eyes, stripped of the pretense of neighborhood friendliness, held an expression Ethan recognized instantly from his divorce, the raw, animal desperation of a man who has just lost everything and has nothing left to lose. Mark didn't move or speak. He just watched Ethan, and then he mouthed one single terrifying word across the crowded hallway: fire. Ethan didn't wait to process the word. He grabbed Lex's arm in the crowded courthouse hallway, the adrenaline from the successful hearing instantly replaced by a cold, stomach-churning fear. "Mark!" he choked out, nodding towards the water fountain where Mark Jensen still stood, eyes burning with defeated rage. He just mouthed something at me, one word: fire. Lex Reyes didn't bother looking at Mark. Her eyes were fixed on Ethan, assessing the genuine terror in his face. She knew intimidation tactics, but Mark's desperation felt different. This was not a lawyer's trick. This was the raw, impulsive threat of a ruined man. "Did anyone else see it?" Lex asked, pulling Ethan firmly down a quieter side corridor. "I don't know. I was looking right at him." It was a direct threat. "My house, Lex. He's going to burn down my house." Lex's mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating the legal and tactical implications. "Okay, stop, breathe. We are not calling the police right now for a mouthed word in a crowded hallway. That buys us a police report, maybe a restraining order, and it makes you look like the aggressor to the civil court. We are going to use this threat as fuel." "Fuel? He just threatened to commit arson. And he did it because the court just removed his $1 million safety net," Lex countered, her voice low and fierce. The injunction being lifted was the worst possible outcome for him. It means they don't get a guaranteed asset seizure by Friday. This isn't just about his house anymore. It's about him being jailed for the bridge loan default. He is unstable, and desperate men are predictable. She walked them quickly back to her office, locking the door. "Here's the plan. We file 2 things immediately. First, an emergency motion for a protective order and anti-harassment injunction against both Mark and Brenda Jensen. We cite the courthouse threat and their documented, long-term pattern of trespass and surveillance, arguing that their actions have now escalated from civil fraud to physical menace." "What's the second thing?" Lex's small, grim smile returned, sharper this time. "We file a counterclaim, not just a countersuit for malicious prosecution. We file a RICO, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, counterclaim, alleging a multi-act conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal trespass, and attempted extortion, the Chemical Trap lawsuit. We name both Mark and Brenda. The security system, the financial deadline, the willful removal of the warning signs, it all paints a picture of a criminal enterprise. The threat of fire is the cherry on top. This changes the game, Ethan. We are no longer just fighting a lawsuit. We are threatening to expose them to federal scrutiny and criminal charges." Ethan felt a renewed surge of energy. This wasn't passive defense. This was war. "I need you to go home and secure the perimeter," Lex instructed, pulling out a dictaphone to record notes for the RICO filing. They know the court process is now too slow. They have 3 days. Their next move will be aggressive, perhaps even violent. Buy motion-activated cameras not just for the pool, but for the house itself. Lock down the sheds, the garage, everything flammable. And for God's sake, don't confront them. You see, Mark? You drive the other way and call me. The fortress and the paranoia. The next 2 days were a blur of hardware store receipts, drilling, and mounting equipment. Ethan was living in a state of hypervigilance. He installed 8 high-definition cameras covering every angle of the house, streaming video to a dedicated monitor in his bedroom. He replaced his old wooden gate with steel, coated in anti-climb paint. He even moved the propane grill cylinder and any yard chemicals into his locked garage, emptying the pool equipment shed entirely of anything flammable. His sanctuary was now a fortress, but it felt more like a prison. He slept fitfully, waking at every passing car, every sound from the yard next door. The silence from the Jensen house was the worst part. He didn't see Mark or Brenda, but he felt their presence, a constant, toxic pressure just beyond the property line. On Wednesday night, the quiet broke. A light, scratching sound came from the back fence near the redwood fence line. Ethan, watching the dedicated security monitor, saw a shadow moving low to the ground. He grabbed his phone and the heavy-duty mag light he'd bought, moving silently to the back window. The camera feed showed Mark, crouched low, wearing dark clothes and a beanie. He wasn't scaling the fence. He was doing something meticulous at the base. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. Is he planting something? Setting an accelerant? He immediately hit record on the security system and called Lex, his voice tight with controlled terror.
He's at the fence, Lex. Mark is outside.
He's doing something to the fence line. Lex's voice was instantly alert. Do not engage! Get the license plate if he leaves. I'm calling the court clerk to serve the protective order papers at their house immediately. Ethan kept his flashlight off, watching the feed. Mark worked for 5 agonizing minutes, then stood up, looking satisfied. He didn't look at the house. He simply melted back into the shadows of his own yard. When Ethan cautiously ventured out moments later, he found no accelerant, no device. Instead, he saw what Mark had done. Mark had meticulously cut the plastic zip ties holding Ethan's new high-visibility warning tape, the tape that designated the exclusion zone around the drained pool, and replaced them with thin, brittle string that would snap instantly in any high wind. He also placed 2 small dead rodents directly beneath one of Ethan's security cameras. It wasn't arson. It was psychological warfare. A precise, petty action designed to remind Ethan that despite the cameras, the fences, and the lawyers, Mark could still cross the line, manipulate the environment, and was watching him constantly. Friday, the hour of liquidation. The deadline arrived. Friday, September 28th. The day the bridge loan was due. Ethan sat in Lex's office, unable to work, unable to breathe deeply. Lex had already filed the RICO counterclaim and the protective order. The latter was served at the Jensen residence that morning, placing an immediate legal mandate on them to maintain a distance of 100 feet from Ethan and his property. The bank calls the loan at 5 p.m. today, Lex said, looking at the clock. If Mark hasn't somehow scraped together the principal, they lose everything. This lawsuit was their last chip, and we just turned it into a threat against them. She pushed a document across the desk. I need you to authorize this. This is our final formal settlement offer filed this morning. We demand they drop the lawsuit with prejudice, meaning they can never sue you over this again, and pay $25,000 to cover the costs of your pool damage, the security system, and the legal fees related to the injunction fight. Why would they agree to pay me anything? Ethan scoffed. Because the alternative is the RICO counterclaim goes forward and a federal prosecutor gets involved, Lex said. I've attached a heavily redacted summary of the evidence, the covert security system, the financial motive, and the sworn affidavit from you about Mark's courthouse threat. It's an ultimatum. Drop the lawsuit and accept the loss, or we expose the conspiracy and Mark might spend the next 10 years in federal prison. We gave them until 4:30 p.m. to respond. The clock ticked toward 4:30 p.m. The tension in the small office was palpable. Ethan felt the room closing in, his focus split between the clock and the phone. 25 p.m., 4:28 p.m. At 4:29 p.m., Lex's dedicated line rang. She answered on the first ring, her expression unreadable. Stern, she greeted. You have 1 minute. Ethan watched her face as Stern talked. Lex remained silent, her eyes locked on the wall behind Ethan. Her posture, initially rigid, slowly began to relax. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Understood, Lex said simply. We will send the dismissal papers and the mutual release tonight. We expect the $25,000 wire transfer by noon tomorrow. If not, the RICO complaint is unsealed. She hung up. Lex looked at Ethan, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. They folded. They are dropping the case with prejudice. They are ruined, and they know I'm not bluffing about the RICO charge. They just bought themselves the ability to face their debt without the added threat of federal prison.